All right.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
Never
about.
Thursday. There it is. Morning, brother.
Jason Plummer. What
Live
you
from
know, man? You
Litchfield,
good today?
Illinois.
Yeah.
I'm all right. Right, hanging in there. Live from live
I'm in
live from
Black Gum,
Litchfield.
Oklahoma.
Black gum. Fitting. It's good.
Black
Good.
Gum. Yes. You see, I try to get to all the places in the nation that have black in them.
That's right. That's right. Black gum, Oklahoma. Now, where is that in Oklahoma? Like, what? Where's the geography?
It's over by
South,
10 Killer
north, east.
Lake. So we're what is it? Northeast Oklahoma.
Okay. So, how far from Kansas then? Kansas City, isn't it?
Oh, I think that's on the other side of the state. So it's
You
not in
said you're
that
northeast?
panhandle area. East,
Okay.
northeast. So over by Fort Smith.
Okay.
Very near Arkansas.
All right.
Tahlequah, Vian.
Okay.
What you know about them
All right.
Vian Wolverines? They be playing some football over there.
All right.
Hear.
All right.
What you know about football?
Camp football? Well, I know a little bit. I know that we're not going to see much of it this fall. So I know that the Big Ten is trying as hard as they can to keep football alive, but I don't think it's going to work.
I'm not very optimistic about that either.
I just don't. Yeah, that's sad. That's a sad day. I enjoy my fall football, especially college. The older I've gotten, college football has been something I follow a lot more since I gotten older.
Yeah.
So I love the energy, excitement, and then the Bears just haven't done much. So hey, but we got Nick Foles.
People out there should know that we're both Chicago Bear fans. I don't know how that happens to be.
Yeah.
But that was one of the unifying factors that first brought us together. Once I heard your theology and knew that you weren't a prosperity gospel guy, and we could hang out together. That's right. And that you were actually reading substantive theology books, John Piper and all those kind of things. For those of you who don't know us, we started going on ski trips together and taking our youth, educating those guys in St. Augustine and just having a big time of it years ago. You've since moved on from being a youth pastor. You're now a full-blown pastor. You got a big chair and everything.
That's right. Yeah, a big chair. That's what I got. Great people. That's what I got. Great people. Man, that was like almost 15 years ago. We've been friends that long. It was a while.
I mean, it seems like it's just been a few days. Our friendship has just flown by.
That's right. It's good. I was thinking about that the other day. Like, man, how long has it been? It's been through a couple of moves, seminary, a couple of children. Yeah.
A couple of children.
And you still look same. Like, you still look good. Except for the hair. You had dreads when I met you.
Yeah, the dreads were longer.
Lots.
And the dreads were going down. We reversed it.
Yep.
But Jason, for those of you who don't know about our relationship, Jason, we adopted our kids about 12 years ago. And Jason was there. I was looking back through some of the adoption pictures, and there you were, 12 years ago.
That's right.
12 years plus, sitting there in the audience as we adopted those guys. And that was a big moment, obviously, in their lives, our lives together. And man, this was just great to journey with you through all these different years. So if you're joining the Way Forward broadcast today, a derivative of the Erskin Music Show, and also under the ministry of Litchfield First Baptist Church, who is pastored by Jason Plummer, we're going to get to the topic of white privilege today. And so I'm going to let you take it away with some of the questions, because as I understand, you do not believe that white privilege, it's a myth. It's a red herring. It's a scenario that's been thrown out by socialists to try to undermine the American fabric of creation.
I would say that I'm not open to the concept of white privilege because of how it frames the discussion and where it comes from.
Okay.
I'll be the first to concede that there are differences between ethnic groups and that there are injustices. So when I say that I am not necessarily a proponent of white privilege, I'm not denying the obvious injustices that are there, that the differences that are there, and the issues that we're dealing with. I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I'm just saying the way that it's being framed, I don't think is accurate or is going to be helpful in furthering the discussion of racial harmony. And the framework comes from that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah. So for those of you who have comments that you want to make, I should probably say this at the top of the show. Make sure that if you're giving a comment like "you guys are stupid" or "that was the stupidest thing that I ever heard," please give a little bit more description, because as I said before, there's about a 10-second delay. And so I won't know whether it's him making a stupid comment or me making a stupid comment that has made you respond that way. So please direct all of your mean tweets and comments to Pastor Jason on the other side of the screen there when it specifically applies to him. And then when it specifically applies to me, again, I'm broadcasting from Black Gum. And so I have the advantage today. You're not broadcasting from White Gum, but I get to broadcast from Black Gum. But hey, time out. I want to bring somebody on. I got a friend who's coming in to say hello. Is that okay, Jason?
That's perfect. Yeah, more the merrier.
Yeah, come on.
Hey, hello.
Hey, I may have.
They can hear you, but you can't hear them.
I can't hear them.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm Tim Hare. I'm the pastor here at Black Gum First Baptist Church, Vian, Oklahoma, eastern part of the state, and known Erskine for quite a while in seminary, and appreciate the Erskin music world and his show. We've made just a lot of good, like-minded brother, and appreciate his investment in my life. And so, yeah, we're just here in very rural parts of Oklahoma, and trying to shine the light of the gospel in a place where, yes, we're in the Bible Belt, but that seems to be a place where the gospel is needed as much as anywhere these days. So it's a joy to be on here.
I think you and I met a while ago. You said you had connection with Erskin Seminary.
Wait a minute. You
correct?
should be able to hear this. Hold on. I'm fixing the microphone. It was going to be a monologue, but now he said that he met you.
I think you and I met.
Other?
I wouldn't say we know each other. I would say that, yeah, I think you and I met years ago at a Chick-fil-A when we're hanging with Erskin.
Okay. Was it in DFW?
Yeah, it was in Texas. Yeah.
Okay.
You and another guy. I'm pretty sure it was either that or all white guys look alike, right? But I'm pretty sure I met you at a Chick-fil-A. I'm almost positive it was you and Erskin. We met in the morning, like an iron sharpens iron Bible study type thing, or
no, I think
we did something. I don't know.
Yeah, that must be Greg.
Well, then all white guys,
different white guy. All white guys.
Different white guy. Sorry. Yeah. Hey, this is you in a year. Yeah. No. I don't know. Maybe my memory is shading, but I could have sworn you and I met through Erskin once before. I'm almost positive. Maybe it wasn't at the Chick-fil-A.
Maybe somewhere else.
I could be wrong. Maybe it's somewhere else. So.
Well, it's nice to meet you through technology,
again,
Jason.
Yeah. It's good. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, you brothers have a lot in common.
Yeah. You got a lot of kids? I got a lot of kids.
I got 2, third one on the way. So be here in a couple months.
The 5. You gotta get 5.
Yeah.
Keep that drive for 5 alive.
I think we're done after 3. we may consider adoption or something. I think 3 biological.
5, you can start a starting lineup for basketball. If you get you 4 more, you can have a baseball starting. That's how I look at it. I look at it through the lens of sports. I can get 5. I can get 5 to take on Erskine, because it takes 5 of us to take on 3 of him, because
It's true.
he's phenomenal in basketball. Yeah.
So
yeah, well, that's cool. It is a pleasure to meet you, bro. It's good.
yes, yeah, you too, Jason.
If you ever find yourself in Illinois, you're welcome to come out and hang out with us.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm hopefully, Lord willing, be in Nashville for a convention next year. So
okay, cool.
But
cool
all right,
cool deal.
All right, good deal. So let's get to our topic at hand here. I want to hear about your objections to white privilege.
Yeah. Well, why don't you put out there what white privilege is? I mean, you talked about Peggy. We were talking about earlier about Peggy McIntosh, who actually coined the term in her essay, right? 1988, 89-ish, something like that. Some years ago. So
the definition that I've been wrestling with, at least for the last 20 minutes or so, has been Francis E. Kendall's definition of having greater access to power and resources than people of color in the same situation.
Okay. And that I think Kendall's definition is broadly speaking probably the most accepted what I've seen in discussions. I mean, generally speaking, people nuance it a little bit, but I would say there was a gal who wrote a piece in the Washington Post Christine Imba, and she says it's the level of societal advantage that comes from with being seen as norm in America. And essentially she defines it as that it makes life smoother being white. It's something you'd barely notice unless it were suddenly taken away from you. It's just a matter of being. So I would say Christine Imba probably flows inside of Kendall's definition of things. Or
a default setting or the norm. Yeah, those are some of the buzzwords.
Right. Yeah. So here's, I guess, where my concerns begin to come when we drop the idea of white privilege is it tends to hone in on race being the single qualifier that makes life easier or worse. And I don't
single
think
qualifier or a qualifier.
Well, I would contend it's a qualifier, but not the most important qualifier. And that's where I have this distinction with white privilege, because white privilege in its roots and it's where it's the framework that white privilege sits in is inside of at best leftist ideology, at worst Marxist ideology. And I do make a distinction because I don't think all liberal leaning people are leftist Marxists. I don't think that's what they are. I think the more progressive you get, the more Marxist you lean. But I think that's where, because if you look at the people who are writing on it, and you look at even Peggy McIntosh herself, it sits right inside of identity politics. It sits right inside of the philosophies of deconstructionism, which go all the way back, or just another wrapping of social Marxism. And so when you start and when you start dropping that and you start using that term, that's where its life originated, and that's where they're using it to describe what's happening in America. So I would concede, of course, race plays some part in things. It's just not the defining qualifier inside of white of privilege, so to speak. Does that make sense, Erskin?
I had my pen up because I'm taking notes on what it is that you're saying, jotting down some things. But here's maybe what I would ask you, because I've felt a little uncomfortable with the term white privilege, because I think it can be misleading to those that perhaps have struggled in certain socioeconomic situations, who have grown up maybe impoverished or a type of class situation in which they would identify more with poor classes or African American classes by virtue of their socioeconomic status. They've struggled with that term some, and obviously Kendall and McIntosh deal with that aspect of it. But is there another term that you would use to describe maybe an imbalance that you see, or what would be a more helpful way to going about talking about things than white privilege if you reject that term?
Yeah, I knew for a fact you're going to ask me that question, and
and you didn't prepare for the test.
No, I did. The thing is the craziest thing is I've lost sleep over this, thinking about that very question, because how do I describe what I'm seeing? Because on the one hand, you and I can have conversations, and I can completely validate what you're saying. So yeah, I think I see what you're seeing. Not fully understanding your experience, but definitely being able to have eyes to it. But at the same time, seeing a broader issue. So at this point, one of the things I think that would begin to encompass. No. No. I love Louis, but man, boy, did he. That was a little crazy. I think if I'm thinking about what I'm seeing, I wonder if Jordan Peterson did a lecture on white privilege and Marxism and different things like that. And one of the ideas he proposed was are we seeing something along the lines of a cultural majority? And that to me seems to fit a better thing what we're seeing. Think of it this way. America, for better or worse, and I'm not going to get into all the sins of America, but just for better or worse, America was founded on or with white European people, right? And it has since grown to be the majority culture. As of right, I think the statistics are something like whites, whatever white is, makes up 61% of the nation's ethnicity. So, and it's been that way for a long time. We've always been the majority, and it's increasingly becoming less white, but we still hold the 61% majority. And so that is a majority culture. And inside a majority culture, there are many different factors that play into some of the sins that we're seeing, some of the distinctions, the differences inside of it. And so I would say that culture majority or majority culture actually is able to be transferable even outside of America versus white privilege. For instance, if you go to China, there's no white privilege in China, but there is culture majority. If you go to India, there's no white privilege in India. There's culture majority. If you go to Mexico, white privilege isn't there, but there is culture majority. So, for instance, one of the things that McIntosh talked about experiencing white privilege was that she can go into a store and find shampoo products, which makes sense. If the majority of your culture is white, then that's what the market's going to decide. You're going to see products there. If I go to India, I'm probably not going to find products for blonde hair, blue eyes as much as I'm going to find for shampoo for however Indians wash their hair. In the same way for the Chinese culture. So I seem to see the idea of the culture majority be a term that seems at least to capture the grandness of what's happening, race being a part of that there are obvious differences between and certain privileges with people groups. So that's kind of where I'm sitting at this point.
Man, there's a whole host of questions that I want to ask you, because when you start bringing other cultures in there and you talk about China, you talk about India, I don't know that we want to go off on this rabbit trail, but you start also talking about Africa, and it is to some extent very much an advantage to go into a Southeast Asian country or to an African country and have white skin, because historically that's been associated with a lot of different things, many of them positive, some of them negative. but there is a immediate difference that is sensed and a different attention to certain things. And missionaries that have worked in those contexts recognize that there have been at times certain advantages. And I think you might be right. And just so I can qualify where it is that I'm coming from, I don't know that I necessarily want to buy into, I don't like the term white privilege. I don't like the term white fragility. But one of the things that it does help me to maybe come to terms with is, how do we talk about ethnicity? And in the talking about ethnicity, does it make you uncomfortable to have white associated with anything that then people study or discuss related to you? Like, Jason is a white this or white, because as I was researching, one of the things that they were saying is that it's normal for Black, African, Latino people to have race be a description that describes some characteristic of who they are or some demographic study. But it's uncomfortable for white people to have white associated with anything that they're doing, because of this supposed notion that that is normal and is the default. And so you don't have to therefore describe whiteness and what that looks like. Does it make you uncomfortable? My question to you, does it make you uncomfortable to have white and then anything else attached to that? White either privilege or white fragility or white flight or white anything. Do those terms in and of themselves make you uncomfortable and make you maybe push away a little bit from this full orb discussion?
Yeah. For the most part, no. The one that caught my attention was white fragility a little bit, just because the word fragile, and I was probably more curious than I was anything of what in the world is Robin DiAngelo talking about when she invokes that term. I mean, if I were to come up and say it, I think to any man in particular, but if I were to say, I mean, if I were to say, man, Black people are so fragile, you just so upset. You know, it's like that term right there, just the term itself, and then the argumentation that, at least, well, I know we'll get to her next week, but I'm finding this inside the circles of white privilege, that if I begin to say, hey, I'm not quite sure I like that terminology, well, it just inherently proves the argument that I'm white, I'm fragile, because I can't handle being talked to about my whiteness, or my race, and it puts you inside of a circular logic. So either I acknowledge that I am fragile, and then be fragile, or I don't acknowledge it, right? I don't acknowledge it, and I prove my point. You are fragile, and so it's like,
yeah, or privileged.
Or privilege. And so there is no discussion. It just, that whole circular reasoning just shuts the whole thing down. And so it's not so much that I mind. White people have our sins. I mean, you got to acknowledge we have our sins. We've got some real hangups, some real screw ups. You know, and we've got some real belief systems and that are there that need to be dealt with. And so
okay, so that's the question that I think we really need to be addressing for people, is how do we get to that aspect? Because I agree with you, there's a lot of circular reasoning that's going on. You know, if I can use my incumbent vernacular, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you speak to an issue and you say, well, I don't necessarily see it that way, you're definitely
right.
somebody who is so privileged and you're so racist that the reason why you don't see it is because you're so steeped in your racism that you can't see it. But then if you don't address the issue, the reason why you don't address the issue is because you're so steeped in your racism that you're just silent about it, and you just want all Black people to die in your silence.
Yeah.
And so I think there's got to be a way for us to get out of that cycle. I was talking with some people this morning, had some breakfast with some of the good brothers up here at Black Gum, and they were saying, man, we're so glad that you're actually talking about this issue, because we feel like at this point in our nation, in our country, people can't even talk about the issue without people getting mad at them. And I'm like, no, I don't work for the Southern Baptist Convention. I don't work for anybody. Erskin music that you see down there at the bottom of your screen is its own thing. The Lord provides for us like the ravens fed Elijah. And so I'm not trying to keep a constituency satisfied. So
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about these issues because I really do want you to have the right and the freedom to be able to say, I'm not buying this whole white privilege thing. I want to talk with my other brothers who can come out and publicly say, I'm not buying this white privilege thing. But I do acknowledge, just like you just said, that there have been some cultural majority sins that have taken place,
Yeah.
that continue to take place, that in the hope of the gospel we need to address. And so how do we get to that point? That's where I want us to get. I want you to be able to free speak and say, hey, I'm not buying the parts of this that speak of and lean toward cultural Marxism, but I am wanting to own up to the fact that there is sin that is still present in this age that we live in. We're a sinful generation, all of us.
Yeah, how we get there is that is I think that's where I really believe the gospel has to be centered, because the only thing that revealed to me that I had racist tendencies towards me, or if I had a view of pride, what was Christ himself showing me? Hey, look, you are arrogant, and in this way, and I one of the things I can appreciate about D'Angelo's book, White Fragility, is one of the things she kept saying to people was just take a breath. And I think we've got to get out of this progressive ideology, the cancel culture, the crazies that are all the way on either side, whether you're alt-right or you are way left. These radical systems are not allowing civility in the dialogue for this to happen. Because the moment you say anything,
Agreed.
either I am either again a racist, or I'm just loving the left or whatever, and both right now have too much say in our culture, way too much, and too much influence, and the fear of just being able to have this conversation on YouTube. Hey, this will go on YouTube, and I guarantee you start looking at the comments that start coming down, and it's going to get crazy.
We ain't afraid of you, YouTube.
So,
get your YouTube self out of
yeah. So I think just one of the things the gospel did for me is it clarified who I was. It clarified what God expects, and it also clarified something else. Here's another thing I can appreciate about D'Angelo's book. And again, the reason I'm commenting on
we'll
it,
get there next week. Let me finish reading the book, bro.
One of the things she debunks is this idea of color blindness, and I completely agree with her. I don't like the idea of color blindness. I don't like the idea that I actually just read another article where a guy says, I don't see color, I just see a human being. And I think that's also feeding this problem. Because one of the ways I have to describe you and you have to describe me is black, white. I mean, that's how God made us. He likes aesthetics. He likes, I look at creation and I see green and I see blue and I see red and I see beauty. I see all this diversity in creation. Then I look at mankind and I see the same kind of diversity. And so I see this idea that God is not colorblind. He actually accentuates color and all that. And so the gospel revealed to me that color is beautiful, and that ethnicity is beautiful. And the gospel showed me that, hey, you should take a breath and chill out and actually look at what makes Erskine so beautiful. Blackness is part of that. His culture is part of that. His experience is part of that. The hair,
nappy head, no shame on me.
So the gospel revealed to me not only my tendencies to exalt my race, but he also showed me the beauty of diversity and the beauty of color, and how I think the gospel actually accentuates whiteness and blackness and Asianness and all those different things. So that's where I think the gospel is helpful to the culture that says, hey, chill out and look at the bigger picture, look at the broad picture.
Yeah, so let's talk more about that here in just a second. But a quick story. It was several years ago because it was during football season, but KB had a song out called No Chains. One of the refrains in it is nappy hair, no shame on me. KB, he's at the top of the gospel Christian hip hop's CHH mountain right now. Lecrae, bro, I love you. You're the foundation of this thing in a lot of ways, but I just got to tell you, man, KB, he stepped up above you, man. He's the new Lecrae. But anyway, I digress. It was football season, and we were in a league in which the majority of the students that were playing in that league were African American. I would say it was probably 95% African American. And thinking back a few years ago, we had the foster children. We had 3 white children that lived with us, and just being a part of our family and everything. Whatever we rock in the minivan, they're listening to as well. And so, I remember on several different occasions, we were listening to KB, and 3 white children. Small white children who are out at the football field, and they're singing this KB song at the top of their hearts. They're not thinking anything of it, and they got the whole nappy head, no shame on me. And so Kelly had to come and be like, hey, don't, no, this is not okay. This is not gonna work. So that was kind of a funny moment. I still think back to those days, and I actually kind of pushed back a little bit, and I was like, why can't they sing that? Like, that's a good song. Like, it doesn't mean what people think it means. And she was just like, nah. So I actually lost that argument, and we had to stop. The kids had to stop singing that song out there. But I thought it's a good teaching moment. Why don't we endorse this song and then let them sing it? And then when people ask questions about why these 3 little white children are singing nappy hair, no shame, like, we can really break down some things and break down some barriers, and it'd be kind of a funny way. But I guess people don't appreciate good humor like we do, Jason. People getting all swole out there.
Well, and that's the thing is, you can't say anything in a lighthearted manner without it being taken like off the charts. Like, you just, one of the things I enjoy when we get to visit each other on our couch is we start to talk about just different things inside our culture that are kind of funny or hilarious that you and I can lightheartedly kind of kid about and see. And all of a sudden, man, if you start having that conversation, I mean, you are crucified quickly.
Maybe we can put a poll up for those. Let's see, we got 9 people who are watching, 3 people who are laughing, but can we put a poll up there? Wouldn't this discussion be helped out tremendously if we could have more comedy involved in the discussion? I mean, I'm not saying go full Dave Chappelle, but we do need to have some more humor introduced into this.
Yeah. We may have talked about this, just some of the distinctions, the way that families handle circumstances or different things is hilarious. There was a YouTube video out of these 2 boys who were talking about the way their moms handle things, and one was a black kid and one was a white kid, and they decided to do an experiment where they were going to call their mom a derogative, right? And just to see what would happen, and they filmed it. So the white kid's sitting there with his phone out the window, and he calls his mom, or he told his mom, like, stop the car, female dog, right? And white mom says, oh, honey, we don't talk like that. We don't do that. We don't do that. Why would you talk like that? Right? And the white kid's just sitting there like nothing's happening. Well, the black kid decides to tell his mom, stop the car. And you see his head get jacked. Stop the car. She gets out.
This is where the show crashes. I don't have my sound effects.
His eyes just got big because he knew what was about to happen. Like, mom was about to handle business. And I'm looking at that saying, that is absolutely hilarious. And then I realized deep inside, my mom was a black woman. Deep inside, my mom was a black woman.
Raise your head if you were raised by the stereotypical black woman. If you had to go and get the switch off the tree by yourself.
That's because the moment that uttered out of my mouth, my mom would have went ape crazy on me, stopping the car, pull me out. And I said I had more identification with that black mom as a kid than I did the white. My mom would never have acted that way. I said that's why I realized, you know what? I was raised by a black woman. That's what
I love it. I love it. Where is that in any of these sociological books? I hadn't seen that discussion anywhere.
That's right. I just kind of rounding it back to the white privilege thing. Um, that's a heavy philosophy being discussed right now. You had talked about in your experience that you benefited from white privilege.
Yeah, so I'm a big proponent. Let me go ahead and put my cards on the table. I'm a big proponent of white privilege. I'm a big advocate of white privilege because I think,
For it,
in my
for
experience,
it.
I've benefited from white privilege
Okay.
because, and if I could tell a little bit of my story, I was a kid who, well, I'm a guy right now whose battery is going low, but I was a kid who had some of those stereotypical troubles when I was in school. I was raised by a single parent, a mother in Austin, Texas, actually Round Rock, Texas, and latchkey kid. She didn't get home until about 10 o'clock at night, and so a lot of the issues that relate to young adolescents' behavior, we would run the streets, smashing glass and getting in fights and doing all different types of things. I started definitely headed down that route, getting suspended from school, fighting, anger issues, a lot of different things. Now, obviously, I wasn't saved at the time, and so I owe the transformation in my life and the greatest transformation in my life to what Christ has done in my life. But I also recognize that during those times, there were families that stepped in on behalf of me who cared for me and said, hey, we want, in various situations, Erskine is going to be suspended. And I was at a point which I was basically kicked out of my own home. Not to make a long story, or to make a long story shorter, there were white families who stepped up and said, hey, we want to have Erskine live for a week at a time and transfer from family to family until he can finish school and then be able to transfer to a better environment. At any of the places where there were gatekeepers who either decided in large part if I would be successful or if I'd have a pathway to success, so to speak, those were all, as I can think about it, those were like white families, white teachers, white people who intervened at very critical times in my life to be able to put me on a trajectory of being able to move forward. I was actually talking to some kids this last week about my first mission experience going overseas, and obviously recognizing that I didn't have the funds and financial support to be able to do that, to be able to go to Rio de Janeiro and preach the gospel. But there were families that stepped in and they provided the financial means for me to be able to do that. And then the backing, and then the support, and then the prayer, and then all the different things. It seems like everywhere in my life that I've been able to succeed and move forward, even with Erskine Music, there have been white families that have been able to provide support and to provide encouragement and to provide foundation and stabilization of our ministry. And it's not to say that black families have not done that, because there have been some black ministries that have supported us. But by and large, because of the power structure and because of the gatekeepers that are available and out there in society, it has been these white families that have stepped up, and they have been a part of the increase. They have been a part of the advance of Erskine Music. And I'm not ashamed to say that, and I'm not ashamed to say that I'm tethered to those things. But I'm also not naive enough to say that everybody has had the same level of opportunities out there. I think some of the dangers in people like, Candace Owen, Thomas Sowell, and other people like that is, yes, they are obviously well educated and very articulate, and they work extremely hard at their craft and what it is they do, and they should be well respected because of that. But at the same time, I know for a fact, being raised in Western Hills on the east side of Temple, life and reality for those students and for my classmates was completely different than what I experienced. Now, by the grace of God, I just happened to excel both in sports and also in fine arts. And so that gave me an advantage and an opportunity to have entrance into other white circles where I could then take advantage of that privilege. But I know full well that not everybody has had those opportunities. Not everybody is articulate. Not everybody has been able to ingratiate themselves in these circles. And for those that have felt like they have been alienated, and those who have actually been alienated from these white circles of affluence and white circles of power or gatekeepers, then I want to be able to be an advocate in some way, to be able to speak and say, how do we open up the porthole so that people have access? Because I don't believe that I'm an anomaly. Like, I think that there's a lot of talent. I think there's a lot of wherewithal and ability in black and brown communities that goes untapped because of the lack of access. And so I think we would all be better together if we would find that talent, if we would access that talent, if we would resource and we would educate that talent, It would make our nation better. It would make us stronger as a people. It would make the body of Christ, I believe, in the context of a church, a more unified church and a more powerful church, if we would begin to advocate for one another and advocate for those who are disadvantaged.
Can I ask about the families who took you in, right? Obviously, in that situation, race was one factor, but what were some other factors? I mean, you seem to interpret that through white, but I would say that it wasn't just white that brought that in. I mean, there had to be other factors that played into that, right? I mean, it was white. It was obviously economic.
Sure.
It was also connected, right? Like certain connections they had. I guess why does white automatically be the deciding factor of privilege when other elements play a stronger role into it? For instance, um, uh,
I want to
you had
answer
to
that.
have,
So yeah, go ahead.
yeah, these folks had to have um, connections. They had to have, and I don't think, I guess I'm not quite convinced that white is the primary connection. I would actually, if I'm going to argue what a primary connection is, I would say money probably trumps more than anything. Affluence probably trumps more even than race. One of the issues I had with D'Angelo's definition of things in her book was she gave the example that Bill Gates' kids were going to be successful because they were white, and I said maybe, but Bill Gates' kids are going to be successful because he's Bill Gates.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to take Barack Obama's daughters, right, and you were to give them an opportunity to go to, say, Harvard Law School, and you were to take my kids and put them into the same running for Harvard Law School, the deciding factor of his girls getting in versus my kids, the mere fact that he's Barack Obama. He's wealthy, he's powerful, the former president, and then race may play an issue, but the prominence of that is his position and stature, right? So again, I'm not saying race doesn't play a part. I'm saying that race doesn't play the single part or the majority part. What I'm finding in our culture, there are three identities. I don't know why this is the case, but three identities that are getting the most press right now: race, gender, and sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be the three defining things that if there's an oppressed group, those three things come into play. I'm not sure why that's the case, but that's what I'm seeing. And I would say that's probably one of 15 deciding factors. So go ahead. I guess I put it out there, so I'm curious what your answer is.
Yeah, and I totally see that, and I totally think that that's a valid point that needs to be brought up. Is that there are some socioeconomic factors that are involved, but I want you to think back maybe to the fact that some of the socioeconomic factors that are involved. Now, transport ourselves back in time just a little bit. This is not modern day United States of America, but I believe that it leads up until now. But let's go back and let's look at some of those categories. I don't believe that it's the only factor. I totally agree with you on that. I don't believe maybe in certain situations that it was the only or the majority factor in some of those decisions. But think about it. If you're saying that the socioeconomic status, or at least the stability of the family home and the family unit, was one that gave them the ability to then take me in, historically, if you're looking at, single parent family, lower income, the ability for a single parent, low income woman to speak to power in the system was greatly limited back in the 80s and early 90s. And I have some pretty vocal family members. They would speak their mind, and they are very articulate at speaking their mind. But at the same time, historically, if you look at that, and studies have been done, and there have been any number of categories that have shown that that level of speaking to power on behalf of change, basically the change that says, my son has not been disciplined appropriately, and you're kicking him out of school for X, Y, and Z, he should be treated better. So when I talk about those gatekeepers, especially in my story, I'm referring to the ability of a single African American low income woman to speak truth to power. Now, it assumes to some extent that there may have been a disparity between the way that I was treated. And I think that sometimes there was a disparity in the way that I was treated, and so easily either brought to the principal's office and paddled, or outright suspended or in school suspension for things that I felt like other classmates were doing at equal or even greater proportion. Being a minority at the school and being a minority of minorities that were at the school, I don't necessarily, I don't want to go back and reverse engineer that, but it just seemed a little bit odd. However, to overcome that, it wasn't the ability of a single parent Black woman to speak truth to power. It was people who had the stability, either economics or wherewithal, or had other kids that were in school that they could advocate for and say, hey, he's with us, that were able to provide a covering. So if I could go through every level of that, I would agree with you that there's other factors that were involved. But if you talk about socioeconomics, the socioeconomic playing field was not level during that time. If you're talking about some of the factors involved with some of the names, like I played basketball, I was in band with people who were the doctors and who were the lawyers. And yes, their name, their status, their verification of who I was or what it was that I was doing or giving me the benefit of the doubt was something that I was able to attach myself to or ride under. And so I do recognize that there was a multiplicity of examples, but I don't want to say that race was not one of those categories when there were other people who did not receive those kind of benefits in due proportion. So I've talked a long time. You respond to that.
No, that's fine. And that's where I think you and I are on common ground is I think that race, again, plays a vital role. But when we start dropping terms like white privilege, it makes the white the essential role. For instance, I'm curious of your thoughts of why aren't the Asians being brought into this discussion? Because right now the Asians are outperforming both whites and blacks on huge levels. Academically, socially, they're making more money than the average white person. They're graduating colleges, masters, and PhDs at faster rates than whites and blacks. But they're a minority, right? They're a minority. So that is something that is you're starting to see. It's okay. Go ahead. You had got your hand up. So
go ahead. I'm doing that just so that you know I have a question.
I'm just curious. Like, how is it okay that are you saying that whites are enabling the Asians to make that, or maybe I don't know. Go ahead.
Well,
go ahead.
I mean, if you look at the ability to get loans, if you look at the perceptions of Indian people, the perception of Asians coming into our particular culture, even doing things like citizenship. Oh, I don't want to put all these comments up here, but there are people who are tuning in and wanting to comment, and we do at some point have to interact with the comments that are being made. So read through some of those comments.
I'm curious
as I'm speaking.
Comparing apples to oranges is Miss Ortega. Elise.
Yeah. Well, let's deal with Miss Ortega a little bit later. But what I'm simply saying is the perceptions. If you take something like, and I think this conversation has to invariably get into systemic injustice, because having an adversarial relationship with the police, that's a big factor. Having a perception of one's ability when it comes to education, that's a big factor. And for a lot of Asians who have very keen minds, they're able to retain a lot of information. Indians who retain a lot of information, there is a perception about their ability that is proved out through the way that they are either afforded new opportunities or the way that they're disciplined or provided opportunities to continue to go forward. And so I don't know that we can necessarily say that that's a level playing field, because the way that Asians come into this country is they immigrate or they come to school or their families are in a position where it's a stable cultural family society. And if you want to talk about the breakdown of the African-American family, we're all into a discussion at that point about systemic levels of injustice that have taken place in our country. So the starting point, maybe what Miss Ortega is talking about there, my little sister Dorian, is talking about there, is that the starting point for African Americans from slavery until now, that has never been a proportionate playing field that we're able to be viewed either perception wise, unless it's athletics, or entertainment to be viewed in the same way as Asian people, Indian people, and other people who are able to get loans, achieve academic success, and then go on to economic strata of economic success in our country. There's never been a playing field. And yet there have been some who have overcome the challenges. And like my sister was talking about there, and I think she makes a fantastic point. It is because there are people who looked past all of those barriers and said, hey, here's somebody that we want to give an opportunity. And all it is an opportunity. You know, if I get put in an honors classroom and I'm not able to succeed, well, I'm not going to be in an honors classroom. You know, I took all honors classes when I was in high school and, you know, try to do pretty much the same thing when I was in college to a certain degree. You know, if you're not succeeding, then you're not succeeding, but the opportunity is there available for you. And then the support is put around you to be able to manufacture to some degree a measure of success. And so I do think it's apples and oranges, Jason. You're wrong.
I think, yeah, I don't know if it's quite, because what you're talking about now is competence and market. The way our market runs is you put the most competent people in the best spots, right? And
No.
are we gonna
Well,
say
you're a football coach, and I'm a former basketball player, and the way that you see life, i.e., the fastest player gets on the field, runs the ball, scores, the best players get on the field, but that's not the way that life works for a lot of people.
That's the way our but that's the way our market. That's why race can't be the central issue here, because if competence doesn't become a rising factor inside of this thing, then the whole thing crashes. You know what I'm saying? Like, so again, it goes to the point is that it's not just primarily about race, but it's about that there are other major factors that play into this, like to be able to do something.
So talent and opportunity are not always an equal playing field. And I guess that's the place where I'm wanting to maybe just speak into this just a little bit, is that you have at the top, you're always going to have talented people, but the portal and the access to get to the top is not always a level playing field. And what I'm saying is there's a lot more competence in the African American and Latino American community than people even know about, than people have even explored, because the cap on that, and I'd like to hear your thought about this, is that the changing demographics in our country mean that there's less and less white people that are going to be born into our culture. You're going to begin to be a small majority, and then you're going to start at some point, 2033, 2045, to begin to be a minority in our culture. And does that make you uncomfortable? Because I would say even at that point, if the Lord has not returned, we're going to still have talent. It's just that talent is going to look dramatically different than it does now. We're going to still have head football coaches. We're going to still have owners of teams. We're going to still have, you know, various stratas of society that are doing incredible things entrepreneurially, but those faces are no longer going to be majority white.
Right. And I'm fine. I'm fine with that, because as a football coach, you're right. Bigger, faster, stronger, more competent. You're on the field. You're playing because at the end of the day, you're wanting to win the game. I would say that competency happens when, of course, opportunity is there to actually use the competency. But I'd also argue that what goes into people's lack of competency is not just racial barriers, but economic barriers and other things that play into it. So when you start to assume white privilege, you're making the essence of white as being the issue. I would say it's a culture majority has got its issues. Culture majority is able to encompass both the economic, the race, and the other issues that go into it. So as you start to see this majority come down, as you're talking about, the white majority come down, and then the minority majority, I guess you want to call that, comes up, then obviously you're going to see market changes. You're going to see those things happen. And hopefully the most competent people are going to be in the positions to make this thing work.
Well, I would just simply say that you have very competent people who are in positions of authority, but you, at this point, I would argue, you don't even have the most competent people who are in positions of authority now, because there's been a cap on African Americans and Latino Americans. And all I have to do is just look at the office of running for the president of the United States, the pool of candidates that we have available, and the decisions that we have ultimately made that have left us with where it is that we're at right now. That you can't tell me that there's not more competent candidates that are out there. So I'll see my point here in just a second.
I would absolutely agree with you that, for instance, if you want a minority candidate, I was a big fan. I liked Alan Keyes. I liked Rubio, Ted Cruz.
That's my guy.
Right. All those guys right there, more competent, more savvy, able to do a better job than what's happening right now. Absolutely agree with you. And because the extremists have hijacked what we have, we're dealing with what we got. And so I'm completely with you. I don't
send us your tweets and hate mail to the third-party candidates.
That's right. You and me can run for president. I'll be your vice president. And we'll make America great.
I love it. We at least have two votes.
Make America great again. Right?
Kelly and Stacey.
Yes.
Kelly and Stacey. We got 2 votes.
Oh my goodness.
330 million more to go.
That's right. No, I'm look, here's something I think, as I'm sure we got to begin to kind of wrap up. The way forward for me, Erskine, as a white evangelical Christian, is to continue talking to you, right? And to continue hearing you and listening to you and being open to having a mindset change. That's one of my way forwards is for me to be able to sit down and just not say you're wrong. I mean, you just don't get it. And then walk away from the table. What I've been praying all week was that, Lord, help my heart understand Erskine's experience and help me to see where he's coming from, and help me to, because I want real solutions to this thing. I want Justin and Ethan to have real solutions to what's to be able to walk in victory and unity and gospel love for neighbor and love for God. I don't want this. So that means I'm going to have to Philippians 2:1-5 myself a lot here to take on the mind of Christ, humble myself, have ears to hear and eyes to see. And I think the church take the same posture.
The very gracious thing about it is that we're not on 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. Like, we approach this from the gospel. And so my way forward and my application points in all of these discussions, if you're tuning in and this is your first broadcast, your first exposure to Erskine music, the way forward, Jason Plummer, Pastor Tim Hare here at Black Gum, and the people that I collaborate with, there's 2 words that I want to use here. You use the word competence. I love that word. I do believe that the cream should rise to the top, but I believe that the rise to the top should be available for a larger number of people. So I'll add the word competence, collaboration, and then obviously the third C that I put there is Christ. I think that unless we begin to collaborate with one another and really begin to think through issues and say, from your perspective, what resources do you have available? From my perspective, what resources do I have available? And so how do we help the most number of people with the spheres of influence that Christ has given us? And so, for instance, you have a son that is a budding genius as it relates to music and production and hearing sounds and different things. And I have access to a studio. I record out of Nashville, a fantastic studio. And so having your son come and stay with us for a while and do a little internship where he can learn some of the ropes of studio engineering and production, man, that helps all of us. It helps the music to increase. It helps his competency to increase. It helps the collaboration to increase. It helps our families to grow closer together. And it helps him as he's producing music to the glory of God to be able to exalt Christ. Why wouldn't we want that for everybody? Let's take competence as a high standard. We don't want to lower the bar, but let's take collaboration as the God-given opportunities and influence that we have. And then let's take Christ and amplify the message and the opportunities, sharpen those tools that we have so that we can amplify our message of Christ to the culture that so desperately needs him. So 3 C's in my application points for the way forward: competence, collaboration, and Christ.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that.
It's a sermon.
Hey, you are a Baptist preacher. You
There
got
you
the
go.
you
I
got the
preached 8
3
messages this week. So
you
that's
got
the
the
ninth one.
alliteration. You got the alliteration. You got it all. I like it. No, I think that's book worthy. That's book worthy.
Well, somebody
Confidence.
else can write that book because I'm a little busy right now.
Understand. Next week we're going to try to delve into white fragility. Right. Continue our
Yeah,
discussion
let's
on
deal
white
with
privilege.
white fragility as a sidebar of this discussion, white privilege. And that's also, I want you to unpack this cultural Marxism that's creeping up on us and creeping into this discussion, because I think this will be a good entrance point to show people while
Yeah.
we can go a certain degree in the direction of understanding and care and compassion and loving our neighbor, we can't buy all of this. We're just not going to be able to swallow all of this. And if you're a follower of Christ, you shouldn't be
Yeah.
swallowing all of this either. So let's dive into that
Yeah.
as well.
I failed the first time you asked me to do it. I went back and I thought, man, that was just not very well articulated. But I've been really chewing on it lately, and I think you're exactly right. I think setting up the framework of cultural Marxism, understanding what that's about, I really do helps you understand better what white fragility, where Robin DiAngelo is coming from. Because I got her book, and I'm like, what in the world is influencing this? Where's this coming from? She's dropping these terms, and well, as I began to look into her history and where she studied and what she's looking at, it makes perfect sense to me then where she got her conclusions. Now that I understand
Right.
the framework she works from, which is why I'm hesitant to embrace the white privileges because of the framework it's in. And so I would love to talk about that just briefly because I think that's really important. And then I think unpacking where she's coming from, I labored through that book. And I didn't text you because you said don't do it. I got preaching this week, but I'm just like, Erskin, did you read this? Erskin, did you see this? Erskin, and I held myself back.
I'm in a discussion group about white fragility. That book.
What? So the people know, you and I probably talk, I don't know, several times a week, right? But I am notorious for dropping like 8 articles on Erskin in his text in a day. Crazy articles, right? So I refrained this week, but next week I would love to talk about that. I think that's a good Marxism, white fragility, and where DiAngelo is getting her understanding and why she arrives at her conclusions the way she does. What we can maybe take from it, but what we definitely have to discard as believers.
And I think it would be helpful maybe at some point to introduce a discussion about COVID.
Yeah.
And the way that COVID is reported, at least responded to, along some of these ethnic lines as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. That's good. I really appreciate the discussion, Erskine, and thank you so much for allowing me to talk to you about these things and being so kind with me as we talk. It's very appreciative.
Again, I appreciate you coming on here and being willing to speak up and say, hey, I disagree with some things. The whole cultural momentum is going downstream at a particular velocity and rate. And you just kind of came and said, wait a minute, I'm not there. Which immediately for some people, probably they went, what? Sideways, sideways. They be looking at you sideways. So
I guarantee you some racist. He's a racist. He's a racist. But it's okay. And I gotta be able to take some of those. Christ will help me with that. So I appreciate that. Would you pray for us?
Amen. You press on, brother. What are you preaching tomorrow?
Acts 8, 26 through 40. That's Philip's encounter with the Ethiopian, and kind of that spirit-empowered, spirit-led witnessing type concept. It's good. I'm between two worlds with preaching and then this, so I can't give you my outline offhand, but I have it written and down. I know where I'm going, know what I'm doing. And actually, oddly enough, it's amazing how one of my points is that the gospel breaks down all barriers for commitment, and understanding the Ethiopian's position inside that text. One of those barriers is prejudice and race. So it's funny how God just kind of keeps bringing these things up inside the text. And I've been preaching through Acts for the last 2 months, 3 months. So he just continues to kind of bring up these things. So it gives me a nice time in the congregation to continue talking about it.
You didn't have to manufacture anything. It was just right there. The Lord just
No,
said,
it's all right
you got to
there to
speak
say.
on it.
That's right. It's there. So it's good. It's good. All right, man.
Well, God bless you and your family. And I'm sure we'll be talking a lot this week. You want to pray for us as we get out of here?
Yeah, that's fine. Gracious Father in heaven, I thank you so much for your kindness and your goodness. I'm so thankful, Lord, for my brother in Christ, Erskin and his family. And I'm thankful, Lord, that the Spirit empowers us to fellowship with one another, to talk about real issues, real things, real injustices, and to be able to even disagree on something, Father, in a way that's loving towards each other and loving toward you. I pray that over the church in general. I just pray, Father, the church will be a place where the cross is lifted up and provides a space for reconciliation, a space that's takes on the person and the mind of Christ, that we put other interests above our own, that we seek to lift each other up, seek to understand. And I love Erskin's points of competence, collaboration in Christ. I think that is a worthy goal, and that is that's what we need to pursue, Father. So I just pray that you empower us to do so and help the church to do so. And I ask these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Amen.